Thank you so much, Dr. Davenport, and our panelists. And with that, we're going to transition into our very next panel, which is our youth panel. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce the moderator of that panel, which is Jasir Rahman. Jasir is a senior at Rice University and a member of Team Enough, representing Brady United Against Gun Violence in Houston. After a loaded gun made its way onto his high school's campus in 2018, Jasir advocated for increased firearm education for parents and guardians of minors in Kentucky. Jasir is working to expand Team Enough and Brady's efforts in states like Texas, where corrupt politicians and an entrenched culture have impeded efforts at gun reform, even though policies such as raising the age and universal background checks have broad public support in the state. To this end, he is working with the Texas Gun Sense to mobilize young people for the Texas Majority to Prevent Gun Violence Advocacy Day next February. And with that, Jasir.
We don't have enough chairs for our panelists, so I'm gonna add one real quick. So give me a moment, sorry. Ooh. Thank you for bearing with me. As y'all heard, my name is Jasir. I'm a senior at Rice University, and first of all, I just want to thank our previous panelists, Claudia, Lisa, Serena, and Dr. Davenport for just all of their work, because it's so important to talk about safe storage and culture, because by the end of this next panel, one person under 18 will have died from family fire or having access to an unsecured firearm. One person, and odds are it's going to be in Texas, because Texas has the most of those youth deaths. So that work is so important, and I just want to thank them again for doing all that work and speaking to that. And I also want to thank Jaime and Texas Doctors for Social Responsibility for having me and for having a youth panel, because this issue, as we've heard time and time again today, gun violence is the #1 killer of kids. It's the #1 killer of people under the age of 19. And it's really important that we're elevated, because we have had a completely different experience from a lot of our previous generations. And unfortunately, we've often lacked having a seat at the table. So I'm happy to have brought a seat up to the table, and also to be here to help moderate and give some voices to our next set of panelists, who I will introduce now. So first is Saami Baig, who is a co-executive director of March for Our Lives Houston and a chapter president of Junior State of America. And y'all feel free to come up here and, thank you. So thank you, Saami. Next, Serena Ray, a senior at Austin High School and the founder of Austin Youth Gun Violence Awareness, who's also an intern at Texas Gun Sense. Next is Faith Mata, who is the sister of Tess Mata, who lost her life in the Robb Elementary School shooting in Uvalde, Texas, and she is now working as an assistant to the section director for oversight and accountability at the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. Next is Arshia Papari, who is a passionate advocate for political change and community safety, deeply involved in efforts to combat gun violence in Texas. He has just started his time at University of Texas, Austin, and is also a member of SEAT, Students Engaged in Advancing Texas. Sorry, I always get that mixed up. So thank you, Arshia. And then finally, Rithika Proddutoor, who is a fourth-year medical student at the Rithika Proddutoor, who is a fourth-year medical student at the Long School of Medicine at UT Health San Antonio. She's interested in pediatrics, critical care, injury prevention, and adolescent medicine. And she's also working to help improve the discussions about safe storage and firearm health as a public health issue within the discipline of medicine. So thank you. So just to get started off, as a general question for everyone, is yesterday the White House announced executive orders relating to firearm violence prevention, but it also covered the issue of trauma within schools, specifically relating to lockdown drills that have been recently put in place. And a lot of politicians, a lot of Texan politicians in particular, have thought that increasing lockdown drills, hardening our schools, and arming teachers is the way that we can prevent this, not common sense gun solutions. So as young people who have recently been in high school or are in college, or just in the academic institutions now, what would make you guys safe? How do you feel about these policies that these politicians are putting forward? Just an open question.
Okay, hi, I'm Serena Ray. I actually am a high school student right now. I attend Austin High School, and on Wednesday we were faced with a gun and bomb threat that forced all of us into a lockdown. a real lockdown, not a drill this time. I was in my English class, and in my opinion, we should have continued learning about Frankenstein and literary techniques and not learn how to hide in a corner properly, silent, afraid, and not knowing the truth behind what is going on. As students, we are forced into many drills such as lockdowns, secures, and holds.
Sorry about that, guys.
Yes, sorry. As students, we are forced into many different types of drills, such as holds, lockdowns, and secures. We don't know the reality behind a lot of the stuff that we are being forced into. A lot of students are desensitized. A lot of students don't understand the reality that was faced upon us because we've lived in this reality for our whole lives. A lot of students expect that our schools can remain safe. A lot of students don't understand that when a gun is brought to campus or when they make a threat, that there are real implications behind this choice. As a student, and especially as a high schooler, I feel that our schools should not even be forced into this situation. I feel that our schools should continue to learn English or math or science and not learn how to hide properly in a corner in the face of a threat. I urge any legislators, advocates, anybody who is here that is contributing to this conversation to continue to advocate for change to keep our schools safe so that we can continue to learn, not learn how to properly continue through a drill. These drills that we are faced with are traumatic. We have teachers come by and knock the doors and different things. We don't understand, and a lot of us are so desensitized. I urge everybody to continue to change this narrative, as it is not a reality that I feel we should be forced into.
I'm Faith. My sister was Tess Marie Mata. She lost her life in the Robb Elementary School shooting in Uvalde, Texas. I do believe that reaching out to your legislative people, your politicians, and letting them know what the actual problem is that's going on. Because I do think these conversations need to be started. I feel like it has started a lot with the youth, and it's become a topic of conversation within our generation. But I feel like it kind of lost touch as the older generations. Mass shootings weren't as common during y'all's times, and I think it's become so common to us that we're just so used to it every single day. However, the Robb Elementary shooting, our shooter was 18. If there would have been a legislative bill for him to be 21 to purchase an assault weapon, would my sister still be here today? And I think that's a question that we ask ourselves over and over. And I think just making sure that we are knowledgeable of gun violence and making sure that us as youth and as this new generation that's up and coming, we are also informing the older generations who may not be as informed as we are, because this is our everyday lives, and it was my sister's life.
Yeah, so speaking to that piece, I mean, I think I just would love to hear about how you guys have reflected on gun violence, how it's impacted your mental health, and also how we can kind of discuss mental health in the context of gun violence, both as something that it's like it impacts because of like the pervasive threat, but also how it impacts, you know, how people interact with firearms and how people interact with like lethal means, for example.
I think a lot of times when it comes to having relations with people who have experienced gun violence in the past, it can be very easy to sort of sideline or not really understand completely the effects of gun violence and the effects of trauma that it has on kids. Sorry, I'm Saami. I was a co-executive director for Martrellis Houston, and I was a Give Earth Courage Fellow. And part of our fellowship program was to meet with advocates all over the nation. Many of my co-fellows had survived the shooting at UMichigan. And I specifically remember one day we were in Washington, D.C. We were touring the Capitol, and there were some kids playing outside. And I was walking with one of my co-fellows. She's from Colorado, and I saw her like, there were some kids playing outside. They were screaming, having fun, just like things that you would like really experience on a daily basis, right? And I saw her sort of shut down, and I'm like, "Are you okay? Like, what's happening?" And she said, It's really triggering my PTSD right now." And that wasn't something I had considered before. And just before we were having a conversation about how diverse the age groups are in this conversation. And I just want to recognize that, like Faith and Serena just talked about, shootings were not really a daily reality for millennials and for people who are of the older generation now. And now that they are, we're all sort of going through this together and learning about how to deal with trauma, how to move forward, how to recognize trauma. And I think we all have a responsibility in this conversation to educate ourselves about how to take care of our kids, how to create better communities and support networks. And the onus is not on one specific age group, but it's on all of us to make sure that we move forward and we formulate better communities and support networks.
Continuing with that health piece, I hope y'all can hear me. But continuing with that health piece, I think I just wanted to, we've talked about extensively today. Obviously, we're here with many physicians. That's kind of the sponsoring group of this convening today. And we've also talked a lot about how gun violence is the #1 cause of death in the context of public health. And recently, there's been a big shift towards public health as sort of this lens through which we view gun violence, not as a political issue or criminal justice. And so specifically for Rithika, who's a med student and has worked on this as a public health issue, I just wanted to get your perspective on how things have recently changed and how young people and how physicians in particular have driven this new wave of like public health approach to gun violence prevention. And a little bit about your work as well, of course.
Hello, so I'm Rithika. I'm a fourth-year medical student at the UT Health Science Center in San Antonio. We definitely see the increasing trends of firearm violence at our institution and within our hospital, which is the safety net hospital for the city of San Antonio. So we admit an average of 1.5 patients per day for firearm-related injuries. And for children, the numbers of patients that we've admitted for firearm-related injuries has doubled since 2018. So in light of this, we've created a firearm injury prevention curriculum. And a big part of that is the Bullet Points framework. So Bullet Points is an organization that specifically talks about how to counsel patients and families on secure storage. So that is really the big initiative that we have currently. We're really trying to encourage medical students and residents to feel more comfortable talking about this with patients and with their families, the patients' families. And we also have free gun locks available within our trauma bay and our trauma clinics. And just making sure that residents and medical students and attendings know that those are there so they can provide them to families and patients as well. And then I know currently they're really working on a hospital-based violence intervention program. So these have been around a little bit over the last 10 or 15 years, but we currently didn't have one. So essentially there's an early intervention when there's a patient who presents with firearm injury, and that's just the beginning. So there's long-term services where someone will follow them. There's a lot of counseling associated with that. There's community members that are involved. So really trying to prevent violence from occurring. So that's something that I'm excited about, and I know that they're working on at our hospital. And I think in general, a lot of the attendings, residents, and medical students, we know that this is a problem, and we know that counseling is something that we should be doing. So just trying to bridge the gap between that understanding and then actually being able to do it in person, finding the time for it, knowing what resources to connect patients and families to. And so I think things are starting to change where definitely have more like signage also about safe storage, secure storage, and more resources that are just available. So yeah, I think hopefully, we'll continue working on those efforts and really talking to as many medical students and residents as we can.
So next question, I want to specifically start with Arshia and then kind of move around, but I think obviously all of you guys have done some sort of mobilization with young people in particular through your organizations. And I just want to ask, what strategies you feel like are most effective at mobilizing young people? And what tools can we use in order to help elevate that youth voice?
Absolutely. My name's Arshia Papari, and I'm a sophomore at the University of Texas at Austin, as well as a member of Students Engaged in Advancing Texas. And really on the point of mobilization, I think the core of my work is really focusing on the fact that youth don't really have a lot of voice in politics and in policy, or a seat at the table. And I think the best way to mobilize youth, to mobilize students and stakeholders directly impacted by gun violence, in large part being the number one leading cause of death for children in the US, is to really show them that they are the stakeholders and that they are the voices of power in these issues going forward in politics. And one of the ways that we've been able to do that is really engaging on the ground level, really speaking with individual students, with people who have gone through these traumatic experiences or who know friends who have gone through these traumatic experiences, and telling them, is this something that you want to see continue? What do you want the future of your community to look like? And I think that's the biggest motivator of being able to get that realization that you have that element of power to shape the future and to then be able to put that to use. And I think that's something that we do really effectively at SEAT, trying to collect youth together in a movement of bringing youth voice to the table on these issues. And something that I would love to see more implementation of going forward, with more youth coming up and speaking out about these issues.
Okay, hi again. So I want to touch a little bit on something that I feel is super important for kids and youth, especially at the high school, middle school age. So I first wanted to just preface this by saying that ever since I was a little kid, I've been amazed with art, and I've always done art, whether it's been finger painting, drawing Barbie dolls on the paper. I've did all sorts of different things. But for some kids, that was music. For some kids, that was writing. For some kids, that was speaking. Every kid has something that they're interested in. And so in my organization, a key part of what I've been working to do is creating methods for students to express themselves and advocate for their voices that might not be as overt as speaking to their legislators. I organized an art gallery of over 8 advocacy artworks created by myself and my peers that advocate for policy change through just something as simple as a drawing or a painting. The same can be said for those who are musicians, who are writers. We need to create a space for youth to be able to uplift their voices from whatever background they come from, whether they are bright enough or open enough to be able to speak in front of a panel or in front of legislators, or whether they want to create an artwork or write a piece of a poem or write a piece of music. Whatever that be, we need to create a space for kids of any background to be able to use their voice. Beyond this, another huge component is creating resources that are accessible at every level, whether this is breaking down any sort of policy that might be difficult to understand at a super easy level through a social media post or an article, whether that is spreading the message about resources such as toolkits for parents to be able to promote safe storage techniques. We need to create the information of gun violence prevention and gun safety at a more accessible level, whether that be through artistic expression, creativity, or something as simple as a policy report. It doesn't have to be hard to spread information to students and to youth to mobilize their voices.
I think two really essential advocacy methods that really work for youth, in my opinion. So first and foremost, I think it's legislative advocacy. Like Serena was talking about, youth have the ability to speak for themselves. Sometimes they just need to be taught how, or need to be shown, what method to take whenever they need to advocate for themselves. We care about issues. We just need to learn what avenues we need to take in order to implement the change that we want. So my junior year of high school, I got to I researched a bill about the boyfriend loophole. I got to work with Representative Goodwin, and we were able to file this bill for Marshallese Houston, and it received a hearing, and that was insane for our organization because we hadn't approached the Texas legislature before. That was a process that, I'm not even joking, I had to teach myself through online tutorials. I went on like Giffords, I found the law. I sent a little email to the office, to like a bunch of offices, and was I expecting a response? No, but I got one, and we were able to show up. I was able to bring someone from a South Asian domestic violence shelter, a representative from them, to be able to tell their story at the state capitol, and that was the first time I actually stepped in the state capitol. So we were very proud that happened, and while it was a very rewarding experience in of itself, the most rewarding aspect of that was being able to teach that process to my other advocates back at Marshallese Houston. And now we're going to be here at the state capitol this upcoming year to advocate again. So I think it's very important that we make sure that legislative advocacy and resources surrounding those aspects of advocacy are available to students, because we are so capable of being able to advocate ourselves. On that same note, social media is such a huge avenue when it comes to advocating for our generation. Gen Z is super interconnected. Like Serena was talking about her strengths with arts. Gen Z is so good at art. I'm not even joking. Like our social media presence is huge. March for Our Lives runs a national Instagram account with, I believe, over 300,000 followers, and a huge strength of theirs is to be able to work with students who are actually on the ground, who are in schools, who experience school shootings, and they teach them to be able to speak for themselves. And I think one really important aspect of that is making sure that you give students platforms, or that you create platforms for yourself. March for Our Lives gave a bunch of Texas students a platform they quoted them on social media. They got them on camera to be able to talk about their experiences, and their social media engagement grew from that. So I think having raw narratives and being able to empower people who have real stories is so important. So yeah, just make sure that we engage with young people, because we do know how to speak for ourselves. Thank you.
I think I just truly want to emphasize starting a conversation with youth. So recently, I was a congressional intern in DC, and within my external program that I was accepted through, I was in a cohort of 36 others. Those 36 are among the prestigious Latino leaders, youth of tomorrow, and many of them are here in DC advocating for something that they believed in. And many of these Latino leaders weren't really informed much on gun violence, and they didn't understand how it was happening or why it continued to happen. So I was one of the only ones there where my big issue of advocacy was gun violence, and I was the only one in the room of 36. And through my time there, I took my time to share my story, my sister's story, and let them know that this is a conversation that needs to be done by us. Because if we're not sharing it, and if we're not talking about it in our ledge offices, if we're not talking about it in our nonprofits, I feel like it's simple to say that nothing is ever really going to get done. And I truly believe it's having those conversations. I think even another conversation to have is, it's a hard conversation to have, but I think having it with your younger kids, because that was never a conversation we thought we needed to have with Tess, on how to be prepared for a school shooting, on what to do if someone breaks into your school. And the sad reality is that is something that needs to be talked about, because I feel that that's a big regret of mine and my parents, is that we let Tess be a kid, we let her go to school, but we never told her that you could be scared in your classroom and you could lose your life. And I think that was one of our biggest regrets, is that we didn't have that conversation with her. So I truly think conversation about gun violence, conversation on how it affects families, conversation on how it's affecting our youth, how it's even affecting our older generations. So I just truly think that we need to start there.
We're getting into about the last 15 minutes, so if folks in the audience have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand. We also have some for our online folks who are here with us. First of all, thank you for being here and bearing through all the technical issues. But if you have any questions, please feel free to put those in the chat as well. Looks like we got a hand up there. Oh. Or were you asking a question?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry about that.
No
Yeah,
worries.
Go ahead.
Hi guys. I wanted to just ask. Honestly, all of y'all are very young. Probably closer to y'all's age more than I'm sure more other people are here today. But I really just wanted to ask, especially after that last note you made, how can we kind of like address the level of seriousness that gun violence really has, with the level of unseriousness that a lot of fellow students, I'm sure, have about the topic? Because like you said, not a lot of people are aware. So like, what do you think is probably the best way to go about really expressing how serious of an issue this is to y'all, to y'all's fellow classmates, who I'm sure at times when they hear about it, they don't think anything, and more often than not, I'm sure they make jokes rather than taking a serious conversation to heart. So like, what are y'all's, I guess, comments on how to basically best address your fellow students?
I can jump in. Also, I'm gonna do handheld now. I think it's better for me. But yeah, I think I can jump in. I think that my brother. Oh Lord, I keep on pressing things. My brother is in high school, or he just graduated high school, and I recently was reached out to by somebody who was at his high school who wanted to start a chapter with Team Enough, which is Brady's youth organization that I'm affiliated with. And unfortunately, I think as all of us have mentioned, gun violence has only increased among young people. You know, I keep on seeing in my own life, I'm surprised, on the first day of classes, as was mentioned earlier, Andrea Villa Rodriguez was killed, and I was about 20 yards from her dorm when they found her body and sent out a text, right? Which was awful. And then the next week, I go back home to Kentucky. First of all, I find out that there was a shooting a block from my house, and then there was a mass shooting on I-75 as I was driving down to my home, and the shooter was at large for multiple days. Schools had to be shut down because of that threat. This epidemic is impacting us at more and more of a community level, and I think that there's two things that could come about from this. Number one is that you just feel numb to the problem, especially as youth. You have to really be you have to find ways to cope. But the other thing is that people take it more seriously now that they figure out that it's something that's around them. And not everyone's going to do that. But if you're able to identify folks, bring them into your network and show people that they can make change, because that's the other thing too, is young people have been shut out from the conversation for so long. If you can't vote, if you can't run for office, if you feel like your voice isn't going to be heard, you're not going to raise it because you're going to think it's too much effort. But the work that we do here, I think, is so important to bring more youth into our conversation and show people that you can make a change. You can go to the Capitol, have your voice heard, and you can feel empowered through that. And I think that our generation has really had to struggle through a lot of that numbness, and increasingly so. But the only way that we're going to be able to bring people into our net is if we open it up. And so just continuing that work and showing people that we can make a change, and partnering with, the adults in the room who do have the power to make a change, like Vicki Goodwin, who's helped us, to make sure that our voices are heard at the highest level, is so important. So I think those partnerships are really important, and just continuing at the work, because I've been so inspired by the demonstrations after Parkland and how many people we were able to bring into our net. So I think you just got to keep on out that work. And you're not going to bring everyone in, but if you can bring in just one person to help change someone's mind, that can grow exponentially.
So y'all mentioned a disconnect between youth and older generations, and I was just wondering if y'all have experienced that within your own families. And if so, how have those conversations played out and do you feel heard?
I do think there is a bit of a disconnect. I think from personal experience, it's just me and my parents now. So I do think there is certain frustration that I have. But I also think don't want to say it's coming from like a youth, like wanting to get out there and wanting to do something and take a stand. Because at first I was like that and my parents weren't. They kind of just wanted to, rightfully so, they wanted to stay home. They wanted to grieve. They didn't want to go to work. But I think it's making sure, I think I tried to do it in the most respectful way and telling them that Tess has no voice. We have to be her voice. So I think to say it to the adults is there's many people who have lost their voice. There's many people who cannot speak on what they have gone through. So I think by stepping up and speaking on behalf of them, I think that's the best we can do. And I think it's just having that connection with your parents and having that conversation with them as well. I know it was hard for my family, and it's going to be hard having those conversations, but it's a conversation that needs to happen.
Before we get to our next audience question in person, I just want to honor a question from somebody in the chat, Mike Russell, kind of speaking on that note, Faith. He asked, how would you like to see us fight for change while honoring Tessa's life? And what are the most tangible ways that we can all affect change? And I guess specifically too, how does your status as a survivor impact your work?
I think it's meaningful. It means something to me. And I also think I had a disconnect with myself because I graduated college, I left for an internship. Now I'm a full-time working adult, and it's like the advocacy stopped. And I felt lost, and I felt like maybe this is how my parents felt. But someone had mentioned earlier in the panel saying that advocacy doesn't just stop. You can do it from home. You can do it wherever you are. And I think just by me, myself, even being here today, coming and speaking, if maybe it's just once out of the year, but just being a voice, using social media as a platform, I truly believe that that is the best way that I can honor my sister, is still continuing to speak about her any chance that I get. But I think it's also a reality for us survivors is that time keeps moving. Time doesn't stop. So we have to move with time as well.
You can get mine. How about that?
Thank you guys for sharing your stories and everything you guys are doing as advocate. As you mentioned, a lot of us here are of generations that were not as affected, and your generation and subsequent generations are affected at a higher number than we were. What can we do as to help your advocacy and help raise your voices to make the world and our community safer for you all and the next generations?
Thank you for that question. I think on that note, youth, of course, are the ones who are being more affected nowadays around the issue of gun violence, and there's that disconnect generationally. However, I think we need to keep in mind that we're all members of a shared community and a shared society. So if we want to see change and if we want to see a betterment for youth and for future generations and those that come after us even. I think it's something that, regardless of the extent to which anyone is a stakeholder in this or someone directly affected by this, we can all advocate together and we can all take action together to really make sure that we get rid of these issues that are prevalent and pervasive in our schools, in our societies, in our homes. Um, and I think also on that note, older generations can really impact the work that youth are doing, that um, the work that we're doing to uplift our voices and uplift these issues through our voices to the political fields, to the policy fields, by empowering students, empowering youth, and really focusing on how youth are coming out to make it known that this is an issue affecting us and it's an issue that needs to have change. I think regardless if to whether or not you've personally been affected or if you know someone affected, I think there's always a way that you can help engage in shared community to take action.
I think something that's really important in this conversation as well is recognizing that while we should open young people to resources, young people are also resources themselves. We bring a perspective that is super important when it comes to conversations like these. Sorry, my voice is hoarse. So I think we are stakeholders that a lot of us can't vote yet, but we know our situation the best, right? So what can we keep on doing to make sure that young people feel safer in our communities, I think, is making sure that we have more events like this, right? Where we have people who are literally panelists on a discussion in front of healthcare professionals, government officials. These conversations are so, so important. And like Faith mentioned, like sometimes they can be difficult, right? But we are a target audience for a lot of the bills that are being passed, and we have a stake in our own future. So making sure that we invest resources and also understand that young people are resources is super important. And I think one example of this, I work for the Harris County Safe Schools Commission. We are in charge of creating school safety recommendations for the third most populous county in the nation. So one really important aspect of our board is including student representatives. My sophomore year when I started, I just needed to be there to be like, no, this actually wouldn't be an initiative that would resonate with young people. And having young people at the table was so important in that scenario, because had there not been, then who would have spoken up? Who would have said something? Who would have called something out? You know what I mean? So I think it's really important that we have young people pull up to the table and that we have a seat for them so that they're able to talk about their experiences.
So I have a 13-year-old granddaughter, and at her school, they do not tell them it is a drill when they have a lockdown drill. So it is very reliably reported to us that she was highly traumatized. You can see her shaking when she comes out of school. Any test that she's had the rest of the day, she fails. We've taken her to see a counselor. That's helped a little bit. Any other ideas on what might be able to help her?
Well, first of all, I'd like to start off by saying that that's a horrible practice. Definitely not very helpful at all. And I think on that note, really, I think it's ensuring that she knows she's loved and to make sure that she's comfortable. I think that is just a sense of PTSD, that it's real trauma, fearing for your life and thinking you're about to be killed. Definitely that's something that's really hard to get past. But I think that is something that school and any school that does that, I know there's many schools that bring in police to simulate a shooting as well. I think all of those tactics things to try and prepare for the worst really just embeds more trauma and more hurt onto students that is not needed. And I think really if that is happening, that should be investigated and an end should be put to that. And I hope that anyone who is in power here to be able to do that can take action on that. Unfortunately, I don't think I would have any conclusive best steps for further aid in that situation.
There we go. Okay. So you've spoken and laid claim, as you justifiably can, to the media, to the electronic communication media, which my generation created, and I was directly involved in that process. And you've spoken to how it serves as a support for all of you and how you can use it to your benefit. But my question is about the dark end of that, what the media can convey. For example, there's been a dramatic rise in the death of young girls by suicide as a result of things that have happened on the media. And so my question is, what resources can you or have you developed that actually oppose the demonic side of this, that promotes violence? I mean, it's something to think about, because I think if we're gonna fix this problem, we have to do both. We have to support each other, but there has to be some way to dispel the negative messages and the damage that they can do to individuals who are young and still developing what they're going to do with their life.
Are you asking, like, what, are you saying that there's violent web pages out there that you would have access to that is affecting the girls?
Yes.
I think as far as social media, I think it's being aware as a youth and knowing that there are certain pages out there that are resourceful. And it's knowing that if you want to become educated on gun violence and become educated on certain topics, it's finding those resources on social media. And I honestly think that's just the best advice I could give. I know from my personal experience, if I want to become educated on something, I do my research. I find those social media pages, I find those web pages in which are able to give me the correct information I need.
Okay.
I think the reality is that social media is a very powerful tool, and this can go both ways. I think, in my opinion, the two issues of spreading awareness and threats are two kind of separate issues when it comes to social media, because there is such benefit to social media for youth to quickly access information or resources, because the reality is a lot of students don't have news apps downloaded on their phones. They don't search elsewhere for their news. So sometimes having something as easy as being able to click a link to access a resource, whether that be a suicide prevention toolkit or something that promotes preventing incidents from happening, that's one of the most useful aspects of social media. But that is not to discount that there is a dangerous, hard reality behind social media, and a lot of the threats that are coming about are coming from social media and online platforms. And it's less of, in my opinion, an issue of the combination of those two, but those two ideas in my head are separate. So as far as threats and other things to that extent go, there definitely, in my opinion, needs to be changes to things like algorithms and dangerous information from spreading. There needs to be prevention much quicker for incidents like that. But I don't think that as a whole, we should discount the power of social media because for so many, and a lot of the work that I do, the only time that I do reach real students is from social media. So I think sometimes while it is a dangerous tool, it also can be very powerful in igniting and mobilizing students if we go about it the correct way.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, just one last round of applause. Thank you. I think that's a great end. Note to end it on. So thank you again to our panelists for all the work that they do, and thank you in the audience for all of your questions. Next up, I've had this slide up for about half the presentation. I'm not Dr. Archie Blyer. I will present to you Dr. Archie Blyer.
That standing ovation wasn't enough. This is hard to imagine doing anything better. It's clearly the next speaker. This was the highlight. I have to say, everybody on the table, Jasir, Saami, Serena, Faith, Arshia, and Rithika, you are it. You're our future, and you said it better than we can ever do again today. So thank you incredibly. I mean, I had to say that because as a pediatrician, young adult oncologist, adolescent oncologist, now a public health researcher, this is it. Everything else is anticlimactic, including the thing on the screen. I'm serious. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jasir. Thank you to our youth panel. Thank you, Dr. Blair. I just wanted to hop on here and let y'all know that it's time for a much needed coffee and stretch your legs break.